I just wanted to say that rainy season has finally ended 2 days ago in the Kansai region here. You know, it's 2 weeks late this year. However, now really hot. Like today is going to be about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, about 35 degrees centigrade. And that would put it with the humidity factor at about 71%. It will feel like it's about 100 degrees, you know, so you can imagine how hot it's getting. And this summer is supposed to be extremely hot. So for those of you who are in Japan now or coming to Japan this August and even September, please be prepared for it. Kanto has just finished too. It was almost like a set today. As I said before though in previous sessions is that if you want to come during the rainy season, go to Hokkaido because technically they don't have a rainy season. And so I think that's the best place to go. The place you don't want to go during rainy season is Okinawa. Okinawa normally sits directly on that front line and it gets pounded for like a good month actually. You know, you just want to avoid certain areas during that time. Today I'm going to talk about English education. And I know I have a lot of you out there who maybe be teaching or have taught in Japan. And if you hear a pounding, it's not an earthquake. Just yesterday, the apartment across from me said that they were moving in. And because in Japan, the walls are still quite thin, especially in apartment, even though they call this a mansion, which is supposed to be concrete and everything, it's very still not noise proof. So you might hear the movers going up and down the stairs. So if you hear a boom, 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 my apologies. It's just the moving and I couldn't change anything. What is really cute is that, you know, in Japan, when you move into an apartment, you can't see it because of the green screen, but they tend to give you a little gift. And so I've been here, over 15 years. And so every time someone moves in across or above or below, they would bring a little gift. It could be like rice, small amount of rice. It was soap in the past. Sometimes it's cookies. I don't know what this is, but it's a really nice custom. They go to the different neighbors, maybe up and down and around, just to say that they're moving in and they introduce themselves. I think that's a really good concept that they have. So across, I think their name was Yamamoto. Yeah, Yamamoto, they have their name here and then they have, I can't read that, but I think it's, Aisatsu, I think. So just to say thank you. And this is kitchen set. Oh, interesting, right? Oh, so dish soap. They have dish soap. So you get a little thing of Joy dish soap and a sponge. So yeah, but again, it's just a small gift to introduce themselves and I think it's a really nice concept. I remember long ago in Hawaii, the neighbors used to kind of do that, but I don't see that happening very much nowadays. Like my sister, she lives in my parents' old home and the neighbors came in and they didn't even talk to them for like, I don't know if they even talked to them since they moved in, but you know, when I was there after 3 months, they hadn't met them yet. So kind of unusual, but again, Hawaii used to kind of be more of a that kind of community. Today I'm going to talk about English education in Japan, and it's so wide that it's really difficult to pick on what to talk about. I'll just start off with a couple of things that I noticed is that, for example, in 2023, Japan was ranked the 87th out of 130 non-English speaking countries. So 87, that's how low their proficiency is. Even within Asia, and you would think they'd be stronger in Asia, they're 15th out of 23. The countries that are above them are like Vietnam, China, South Korea. And so Japan is still struggling. So, you know, in my experience, I've been in Japan through the years, you know, a total of 30 years. I've seen actually that the English seriousness or the ability and proficiency has actually gone down. Even the idea of study abroad back in the 90s and the early 2000s, more people were going abroad, especially for degree seeking. Now it's more like you might do a 1 year or you might do 2 weeks or even a month, but it has gotten so much less. So what I see is that English education in Japan or proficiency is actually on the decline when it should be going the opposite way. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about. And personally, my opinion is that it is going down. But you know, there's some things you have to also think about is that when do the Japanese students really need to have English outside of studying for it? For example, how many of the Japanese, when they get into the company, will actually use English in their job? I don't know any data on that, but I would guess somewhere around maybe 2% at most. I mean, my trading company, maybe some people might be sent to take care of foreigners or maybe sent to an outside office, but it's very, very few. So in a way, there's not that need that they have to learn English, but it's one of the main subjects, right? With math math and science and Japanese, and then there's English. But the system seems to be struggling because it's not working. I'm not being so overly critical, but there are a lot of really good English teachers, Japanese English teachers who are Japanese. There are some who are kikokusei, means that they're returnees. They went over with their family to America or Australia, UK or wherever, and they came back and then they became English teachers. They're very good. There's others who have gone on what is called the Japan LEAP program, the Japan Language Education Assistance program, which is like in America, they have the JET program where Americans or even Australians or Irish or people come over and they can spend from 1 to 3 years here teaching as an AET, Assistant English Teacher in Japan. Well, the reverse of that is the JLEAP, but again, it's not sponsored by the other country. It's sponsored basically by Japan. I just met one of my friends at pickleball, and she's one of those graduates, or she had gone on a program for a year in Louisiana, and so she speaks really, really well. And so there are those. But again, overall, most of the teachers do not have a good command of the communicative English. And so that's part of the problem. But again, the main thing is, why are they studying English? It's not to be some great international businessman. I mean, there might be one or two, but basically it's for the test. You want to get into you take a test for a better high school. You want to take a test to get into a good university. And some even companies have like TOEIC tests and things too. It's basically about the test. It's like an academic subject. It's not so much that you're studying because you need a skill or a tool. So I think this is the biggest problem for the Japan system, is that they are still trying to figure out how to use this present system and how to apply it into creating what they want to have, like these international people, global jinzai. And this is where the struggle is. The systems don't match, and it's, in my opinion, it's broken, but nobody knows what to do because it's so huge and there's so many things going on, right? Very few Japanese need, however, what I'd like them to see English as enriching their lives. Yeah, Tanabe tours, if everyone thought that would be great. But again, I still think it's the basic need. If people don't use it or they don't have a reason to, I mean, think about it. How many average Japanese are going to use English? They might go on their honeymoon to Hawaii or somewhere, and a lot of times they don't even need English, as well as they might have to have hotel English, right? Check in, I want to order beer or whatever it is. But on the most part, they really don't need English, right? Or they would go on a JTB tour that has an escort or guide that is their translator. So, it's set up to cushion or protect them in a sense that they don't really need English. And that's the service, which is really nice for those who can't speak English. So I think that's a lot to do with it, is that if they just thought about, something to enrich their lives or something to be better, it would be much easier. But that's really not the case in Japan at the present moment, I think, for most people. So that's kind of where it is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the schools too. The reason too is that the English teachers in Japan, many of them, maybe most of them, don't have a good command of English as a spoken language. So it's hard to teach a communicative style or in English if you don't have the command. But they all know grammar very well. So they're able to focus on the theory and the grammar and then the actual reading and the translating, right? Because they can do that. So the focus in Japanese junior high, high school, and even in university, for most universities, is focused on the reading and the translating into, usually from English text into Japanese, which makes it easier for the teacher, right? Because then they just have to check the Japanese. What is also interesting to me is that the Japanese until recently have not really considered using like international English tests like TOEFL IBT or IELTS. They've been using their own for a long time, Eiken and TOEIC, which is fine. However, it's designed by Japanese companies for Japanese people. And so sometimes I question, I don't know if that's the best way to really get this whole idea of international English study. Not that they're not capable people working at these companies, but I think that there's still a gap between the international standard and the Japanese standard. And maybe that was done for a reason, I don't know. Maybe it's easier to teach like that. I don't know. So another reason is that the Ministry of Education, they are trying to increase the number of years of English because they feel that, Japan is going down in proficiency, that they have to increase the years. Before it was 5th and 6th grade, they would start them off. But now it's I think third and fourth grade, I think it was, where they're trying to increase the number of hours. I think 35 hours a semester or a quarter and 1 hour a week. And then the fifth and sixth grade people are also pushed up to get more of a full course. My question to that also is that more doesn't mean better, right? If you do it the same way, and if it's not done in a more interactive, interesting way, the students' interests they'll be bored and they will be less motivated to continue studying English, even though they have to study all the way until they graduate from high school. That's also a problem, is that a lot of people think more is better. It's not about the amount, it's about the system. And I've said before in many sessions, it's a lot of times the Japanese systems are the problem, and that's what trips them up. It's not other things, it's within the system. That's what I think is part of the problem. So same in each nation, however, we see European and North American Aussies to learn a language for fun, and then that be ideal for job. Yeah, it would. But another thing with European nations is that a lot of them need it for business. They do their work, a lot of their business in English, and they're so close geographically that they need the English. And that's why if you look at the top 10 of that English proficiency, what they call chart, there's like 10. Out of the 10, I think it was 8 were from Europe. I think Netherlands were number 1, and then, Germany was number 10. I can't remember all the ones with Sweden's in there. I think Singapore was the only Asian country was number 2, and I think it was, South Africa. I think it was 7 or 8. But outside of that, they were all from European nations, because I think there's a definite need. And another thing I always thought was that Japan has such a large population. They have 127 million people. So when you compare to smaller countries like Czech Republic, or even Netherlands is smaller, some are 5 million, some up to 50 million, 30 million, it's still much smaller than Japan. And I said this before in another session, it's all about business, and can you create a business that generates income. If you watch Japanese television, 99.9 or 99% of all movies and all shows are dubbed into Japanese, which is a great service for the average Japanese, right? But I don't think it helps them with hearing or even getting used to kind of a rhythm or just pronunciation. Whereas many of these European countries, I even saw some in Mexico when I was in Mexico, is that they don't dub everything. A lot of it is just subtitles, like Finland, for example. I think even if they read the subtitles, they get used to at least hearing it. They get more used to it too. So I think because Japan's population is so large, it works against them in this way, because then there's markets created that companies can create dubbing companies and make the service so user-friendly, which Japanese are really good at. Once there's a precedent set, Japanese are excellent at being able to create those systems, right? That's what they've done in Japan. So basically everything is dubbed. And yes, Tanabe tours, if the Japanese would just do it for fun, they would be great. But again, probably not human nature so much, I think. So how do you create a system that the Japanese students would be more motivated? And that's, I think, the biggest gap that's going on now with the Ministry of Education and the reality in the class. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but the Ministry of Education has tried different kind of policies, but they've all kind of just died. They wanted to set up this more seamless kind of step up scaffolding English, and it was supposed to go into effect, I think it was a couple of years ago. Suddenly that's on hold. And then there was another angle which I thought was really good, because I always say on this session is that critical thinking is lacking in Japan because it's not part of the education system. Well, they were going to offer open-ended questions on the entrance exams for Japanese and math, not English, Japanese and math. And that started in 2011, 2013, and then they went for 5 years, and then there was an extension. And I think it was 2021, they just killed it. They said, no, we can't correct it. It's too hard to correct. And they were going to go through Benesse, this private company, that they were going to check it. And, they found out that they did a little test and it wasn't going to be enough. I was disappointed because that was the only kind of critical thinking part of the test, I thought. Wow, Japan is actually getting it. They're moving toward more critical thinking, open thinking, logical thinking, but that was killed. Oh, one more thing that happened too that was interesting was because they call it Senta Shiken, center test. That's the national English test. People felt that it was only testing reading and listening and not speaking and writing. And you got to have the 4 skills, right? I mean, any English teacher will tell you need the 4 skills. So what they decided to do was they said, they had a great idea, the ministry. They said, okay, we're going to kind of outsource or farm it out to private companies like IELTS and TOEFL and TOEIC and even the Aiken and all. There's 7 tests. And they're going to let people take their test, not have to use the center English test, the center skin English test. So they thought they had a great idea. Well, that created a whole nother can of worms, because what happens is that all 7 tests are different. They all have different objectives. They all cost different. That was another big factor, that they felt like, like maybe TOEFL IBT is $200, and ACAN might be what, $40, $50. I mean, there was all these things like which test would you take and which is more important, and on and on and on. And so finally they put that on hold too. That was supposed to be implemented in 2021, I think it was. And now it's still on hold because there's too many questions. And so now they're thinking of just leaving it to the universities, almost like just leaving it to the states, right, in America. They just, but again, it's on hold. So this is another problem, is that they finally had this idea like, okay, we'll just give it to the professional testing companies. And then how do you compare like an ACAN test to a TOEIC test, to a TOEFL test, to a IELTS, to, GTEC, or there's like 7 of them. And, even if you have a conversion, like I think TOEFL and IELTS kind of has a conversion. It's not exact, but that's still okay. But some of them are so different that it's hard to make a conversion on that. That's another problem. So again, the ministry tried to come up with an idea which failed, which is really, really sad. Your son is on JET, their talent starts in Kindle, they have different methods, not more year. They need a different, yeah, exactly, right? It's about the system. JET is a little bit different, but still under this umbrella of English education. Now, I don't know how many of you out there have been on a JET program as an AET, Assistant English Teacher. For those of you who don't know the JET program, it's a program that started in 1987. The Japanese government would accept, I think at that year was only 1,000, and then it's up to like 5,000, maybe it's more now. But they started accepting Americans and eventually people from UK, Australia, English-speaking countries. They even started taking people from Thailand and other languages too. And what it is they take them, they bring them here, set them up, and they call them AETs, Assistant English Teachers, or Assistant Thai Teachers, or Assistant, depends on what language they come from. They're sent out to different parts of Japan, and every system is different, because the rural areas can be like, you can be only at one school, or you can be what is like my sister did. She had in Shimaneken, she did shotgun, so she would go to a different school every day. So it's all different. It's just very varied. You would think, wow, Japanese government is moving ahead. Yeah, that's great for English study and all. But do you know the reason that they set up the JET program originally? It wasn't set up by the Ministry of Education. It was set up by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The idea, the main purpose, they're probably not going to tell you this, but this is really the first reason was they wanted, like at that time, Americans to come to Japan, have a great experience, love Japan, go back home and promote and tell people about how good Japan is. So it was kind of a goodwill, kind of a promotion, not campaign, but it was an idea. I mean, it's a nice idea, right? But it wasn't about how to improve or how to help or how to work within the English program to improve the motivation of the students. That wasn't really an issue. In fact, I think the number 2 reason was that the reverse of that was they wanted these Americans at that time to come in to different areas, rural areas, wherever. And for rural as well as all, even city people who have never had a chance to meet foreigners, to learn and accept different kind of culture, accept more diversity, which is a good thing too. It's a great thing, right? But those were the 2. There was no like, work with the English teachers in Japan to improve motivation or pronunciation or none of that. Now you might see it online. They might write it in now. They kind of sneak it in because, of course, sounds great. And I was shocked when I heard that, because I also had applied for the JET program in 1987 as a CIR. They have one more position called CIR, Coordinator of International Relations. You have to speak some Japanese to do this, but I declined at that time to go to graduate school, and then I became blacklisted because you're not supposed to say no, I guess, if you apply. I always thought it was for English until I talked to many JET alumni, and they all told me the same story. No, that's not the reason. In fact, the problem was a lot of these Japanese English teachers in the schools did not know how to use or maximize the presence of these AETs. I hope now it's different, but back when I talked in the last, maybe like the first 15 years or whatever, 20 years, a lot of the AETs were really disappointed. They love Japan, so the foreign ministry's reason to bring bring them here was right on in that case, but they would normally quit in the first or second year. You could stay up to 3 years. And the reason was they loved the people, they loved the country, they loved the school, but they didn't love their job because they were just like robots or parrots. They just were made to repeat things, or no one knew how to maximize them. So a lot of times they didn't have things to do or not much work. And so it was really, really hard for so many AETs who really loved Japan. And I hope, Tanabe Tours, your son, is in a different situation. Hopefully by now, since 1987, what is that? Almost like 30 something years, that they've refined it. And again, every area is different. That's the problem. You don't know. It's like it's hit or miss. You could go to a really good place. Like my sister went to Shimane. She was nurtured and taken care of and loved there. And it really helped her grow in those 3 years that she was in Shimane. So she was fortunate. She had like the sensei who took care of her. He was the supervisor of the ministry, not ministry, the local board of education, and they took good care of her. She did all kinds of things, Thanksgiving dinners, Special Olympics, and all these projects. She was given a lot of leeway, autonomy, right? So it just depends on where you are. It's hit or miss. But for most of the people I talk to, it's more like, they don't get that ability to have more flexibility. The JET program, the question mark is still out. How effective? Did it serve what they wanted it to do? Because another thing is that when I ask about evaluations, there's no evaluations about the whole program. I don't know if they changed that in the last 10 years, but without evaluations, how can you have any reflection? How can you make things better, right? So it's been ongoing since 1987, but nobody really has any information or data on how successful it was. Maybe it was really helpful for a lot of students. I'm sure a lot of students were touched by these AETs, right? I have some AET friends who had a wonderful time, who still have their connection with their school people, their teachers and all. I'm not saying it was bad. I'm just saying that the way it was structured originally, the AETs, they didn't maximize or optimize the use of these young, talented, energetic. Now maybe they weren't trained in education or English, but they could have managed to use them in ways to excite your students. Think about it. You have young, because the age limit is 30. So you have usually people who have graduated from university just last year or recently, or even up to 30. They're young, they're energetic, they want to do things, especially, Western foreigners. They always want to take a new challenge. You got this energy, and if you could tap into it, it'd be amazing, I think. But within the Japanese system, no one really knew how to maximize their use. And these English teachers, it's not their fault either, because they weren't trained how to use or maximize such a resource in their class. They were only worried about teaching for the test, and they had to cover so much in a textbook too, so the students could take the test. So in a way, these AETs coming in and they're doing pronunciation or doing whatever it is, it was kind of mendokusai. It was kind of troublesome in a way, because they had to do what they had to do. Hi Mike, it may be interesting to look into how the likes of South Koreans maintain the position, and they may be more involved with Western media, whereas Japanese are more self-contained. Yeah, I think that's true. Moso tube. That I think that no matter what, when you talk about Japan, it's an island nation, kind of like UK is too, in a sense. There's a lot of comparison between UK and Japan. So they are quite more isolated. And as I said before, if you think about it, how many times has Japan actually been taken over or conquered by an outside country after World War II? Never before that, right? So in a way, it's still very, I don't want to say the idea of pure, but the idea of just they haven't had much outside influence until, yes, Perry came in 1858, and that's where you have the new Shogun movie and on Roku and all that. But again, Japan accepted some terms and they agreed. They weren't conquered or occupied, right? Only after World War II. So Japan has that. Whereas Korea, China, and all have been taken back and forth. You had the Mongols come through. You had lots of things going on. So that is true. Another difference too is, this is really interesting. I heard the South Korean English system was based and designed after the Japanese system. Now to this day, I don't know if it's similar or it's still like the Japanese system where it's only for the test. Before, I heard from some Koreans who I used to work with, they said it was all about the test again, same as the Japanese system, because a lot of the systems were from Japan because Japan occupied Korea. They were designed in the same system. But the Koreans seem to have a much, much stronger passion for English. It's to the point that Korean families will do what we call tanshinfuning in Japanese. Tanshinfuning is where the husband will go abroad or domestically, he'll go to another city by himself, work, and the wife will stay with the child child in the place, in their home. Usually it's for educational purposes, that they want to continue at a good school, or they've been there and the husband just works, of course, supports the family. Well, the reverse of that in Korea is that the husband stays in Korea and the family goes to United States or somewhere that English is taught and does English or studies in the schools. In fact, the Philippines is a major destination for a lot of these Korean families. They go there and the husband stays in Korea and sends money, of course, to support the education of their children. It's for English because the Philippines was a much, cost-wise, it's a much better deal than, America is super expensive, right? I'm sure some might think of Singapore, but it might be harder to go there, but any place that's an English-speaking kind of country. So you have a large community of Koreans in Philippines who are there for the English. And I also noticed when I was, International Center Director, I used to go to Korea a lot, and they have a lot of these English villages, almost like a playland, but it's all about English. It's all about, Japan has a couple, in Kansai we have a couple, I went to one, but not to the extent that like Koreans have this idea of English village. Theirs is like mass scale. For whatever reason, maybe they realize that that's the key to financial success, and maybe it is, I don't know. Whereas in Japan, it never really took off so much because in a way, Japan has always been kind of isolated. And because I think Korea has about half the population, I can't remember exactly, maybe a little over 50 million, South Korea, and Japan is 127 million. So still a large population base allows Japan to create things within. You don't necessarily have to go out. Maybe you don't have to associate or do business, although that's now changing. So that could be it too. I have met some young people from Japan with excellent English skills, but they were motivated. Yes. So think about it. Maybe if they took English completely out of the curriculum, the ones who really wanted to study would do so because they're motivated, right? My question was always, maybe English is not necessary to be part of the Japanese education curriculum. I don't know. That's just a wild thought, but because if it's not really needed and the proficiency is actually going lower and the system is broken, maybe open it to all four languages. You could do Chinese, you could do Vietnamese, Korean, or whatever, instead of just English is it, So in fact, Asia is much closer. And if you even look at the tourism numbers, the number one country that is coming to Japan, that they just broke all records, I think it's 17 million people in half a year, is South Korea. Number 2 is China. And number 3 is Taiwan. United States is number 4. Maybe that's the business future model. I don't know. So I think the question is, Irasima, is how do we get more Japanese motivated to study English? This is what I hear. They say when they go to when they're in elementary school and sometimes their parents send them to English camp or English school a little bit. It's enjoyable, it's fun. But then they go to junior high school and then it's just grammar and just boom, boom, boom. I made a video about Emily from Japan who's studying in Canada, and she quit Kansai Gaidai because she said that the classes, she used the word quiet, which I think she meant the classes were just no one's talking. It's just one way basically. And she didn't get any kind of feedback or any help with her pronunciation, and so she left, right? The system itself has to be changed. So how do you do that? It can't always be fun, right? Believe it's how you teach. I believe it's making it applicable. But again, you also have to remember a lot of the teachers who teach English in Japanese schools, they are solid, academic, good graduates. But the English training is very minimal. And even for the average teacher, like in America, they have a practicum for, 2 months? I can't remember. And then they do a 1 semester student teaching. In Japan, the actual teaching, and this is just teaching in general, is usually only 3 weeks. So they don't have that 1 semester. They have 3 weeks. A lot of that is just shadowing or just watching, observing. So they don't really have the teaching experience, one. And then on top of that, you put that they have to have the English ability. Now, they can teach English probably really, really good. That's why even in the videos I made, Emily said her grammar is right on and her teachers were wonderful at teaching grammar. 100%, I believe that too. But they're not able to take that to the next level, which makes it more for not just studying English. The way it comes out is in Japan, it's like they're studying about English. They're not studying English. There's a little nuance difference there. It's like an academic subject. So that's what they have to switch over. And I don't know why nobody gets it. I'm thinking to myself, what's so hard about just make it more applicable, more real, create situations where, you're sending students out. But then you look at who is making these programs. It's the bureaucrats, right, from the ministry. And where do they come from? All the top bureaucrats, they're all the elite, right? They're Tokyo University and Kyoto University and the top Keio Yale, all of the top university graduates, they came through that system. I would bet almost maybe 2% actually studied abroad. The rest of them just came straight because their job was set. Their future was set. They graduated in 4 years and they're into the ministry, the high level. There's two levels, right? There's the lower level and the higher level. They get into the high level where they are set for life. Those are your bureaucrats who are making the program for English. But if they haven't been overseas or they haven't had, they can probably read and their vocabulary must be amazing. They must have like photographic memories. But when it comes down to actual conversing, and I've read a lot of the Tokyo University bureaucrats' letters, like textbook, but not natural, not flowing. But I've read a lot of them and I go, and you can understand, but it's really rough. Those are the people making this program. I don't think they have the bandwidth or the creative mind to come up with a program because they haven't experienced it. Now, the ministry does send some of their really elite people abroad after they join the different ministry. I know a couple of them that have gone to Georgetown or gone here for 2 years and they come back. But there's so few of them. Overall, the minute they can't send everybody, there's thousands and thousands, right? In the cabinet office and in the ministries and everything. So how do you get more input? Lots of times they'll send these little parties or delegations to different countries to study. But what you really need to do is you need to bring in someone from outside who can work with you and stay in Japan a while, not do the drive-bys. You need to have someone invested in that program or that future reform of the English program. You can't just do it like send a delegation and come back, right? Sima-wan, getting back to what you're saying is that there are not a lot, but many Japanese who are very good with English, but they're far and few. I rarely meet them unless you're abroad. Or for example, I go to this Indian restaurant here close to my house and there's Toshisha International High School there. And I'm sitting there and next to me is these two students and they're speaking English. Young kids, not young, but about high school. So I have my pickleball coach and me and we're having lunch, He's speaking Japanese or speaking Japanese. Then I start hearing them speaking, so then I start talking to them about it. But those are really the few, right? Those who go to international school or they are kikokusei. Kikokusei is returnees. They spent, I think like 6 years in America and someone else spent maybe 7 in Tennessee or was it Louisiana, and then they came back. And very unusual though to meet that type. Again, they are there, but they're very few, and that's why it's so difficult when travelers come to Japan to sometimes find someone who speaks. The Japanese want to help you. If you had something to show them in Japanese, this is where I want to go. They would be happy to help you. It's just the language that is always kind of a block. They feel maybe, I can't communicate, or they feel like, I studied English so much and I cannot communicate how embarrassing. And sometimes you get the laugh. No one's laughing at you. It's called the nervous laugh, or the laugh of, I'm sorry that I can't do this. So they'll give this kind of nervous kind of laugh when they can't do it, and it's nothing offensive. It's actually kind of establishing a reach out to you, like when they go, kind of almost like laughing at themselves a bit. So don't feel if you're asking someone for help and they start laughing, not laughing, but just like that little kind of, not giggle, but a kind of a laugh. It's more about the nervousness and about they feel maybe, I can't do this. They're not laughing at you. Trust me. Yeah, good question. I think Japan needs to open up more to immigration because they cannot survive at this point. But how do you, everybody worries about when you bring in immigration, you let in the negative as well as the positive, right? And so that's the problem. And so as I said in my last live, I think the government never uses the word immigration, although they are setting up more flexible working visas for especially people from like Asia, people to come in to work, whether it's manual jobs or like a CNA or working at an auto shop or things like that. Of course, they also offer scholarships for those who are in, graduate school or whatever. I think that every government is going to decide on their own, but Japan still has to open up more if they want to have enough people working, but two, if they also want diversity. I think that's the hard part. It's establishing diversity, and yet you want your society to be safe and well. Ralph Suniko says, I think the best way to learn language is through immersion. I think the best way to immerse people is through open world computer games. Maybe that's the answer. Open world computer games. If there is a way that somehow lets people learn English, that would be the billion-dollar business. Hey Ralph, if you can do that, if you figured out how to make that a business, that's a gold mine. That would be amazing. But yes, immersion. If it can't be on computer games, a lot of times it's through maybe like Zoom or virtual mediums, or going to the country. I believe that lots of times the only way you're going to motivate yourself is you just go there. When you go there to a country that you don't speak the language, it's uncomfortable, right? Where you got to leave your comfort zone, and it forces you. Whenever I travel to a country that I don't speak the language and they don't speak English very well, all the antennas go up and all the radar goes up, and you are scanning everything. And at the same time, you are learning and becoming aware of everything going on. So that's why I believe travel is the best educator in the world of any, more than anything, is travel and going there. And if you can immerse yourself, immersing means, I say, to stay as long as you can. You know, a week is a little bit short, but better than nothing, of course. You know, a month, 2 months, 3 months, a year. If you can, I think that's the best. Immersion, as you say, is the best thing to force yourself to be in an uncomfortable position, because I think that teaches people empathy. It teaches people kind of compassion. And when you go back home and you might see a foreigner or someone who needs help, you might tend to reach out because you know how it is. You've walked in their moccasins. The Japanese education system too much focuses on English as a school subject. Some of the science and other classes should be taught in English to be able to use English in practice settings. If this were possible, Nishi, that would be ideal, that they could start teaching other courses in English. In fact, I just was reading an article that I had from 8 years ago that basically said students are more motivated when they're studied at level appropriate. Like if they're doing science and it's level appropriate and it's in English, let's say, they're much more motivated. They're much more excited to learn English as well as the subject. So yes, I think the problem is though, unless you have a basic foundation of enough English, if you don't have enough English and you cannot understand enough English, that if it's taught English, you cannot get anything from it and you get more frustrated. And the reason I'm saying this is because the Ministry of Education again had this great idea, let's see how many years ago, maybe 12 years ago, that they said, okay, you professors at the universities, all of you studied English. All of you should be able to speak English. So from now on, we want you to teach a certain number of your classes in English. All the professors were like shocked, right? Because they never taught in English before, and most of them cannot even speak English well. But that was an order. And so what happens is, I actually did a faculty development presentation to a university here in Osaka about what to do, because they didn't know what to do. But it's almost an impossible situation, right? Think of it first. If the professors don't speak English well or cannot speak fluently, then how are they going to teach in English? Second, do you think those students after, like, let's say 6 years, 3 years in junior high, 3 years high school, 2 to 4 years in the university can listen to regular English? Probably not. Or listen to the professor's English? Probably not again. So I was asked to give a faculty development presentation about how to teach in English. Okay, this is the difference. Studying English, studying in English, completely different. So the ministry ordered teach in English. They just figured that people would get it because they've been studying so long. It was kind of like just throw them in, sink or swim kind of thing. And of course, that failed terribly because nobody was willing to do it. Now, some professors who had studied abroad or who had been abroad and came, they tried, but the students didn't understand the English, of course. So then it was like just a waste of time. Some taught half-half. They taught some in English and some in Japanese. But again, a lot of the Japanese students will only listen to the Japanese. Some, like I told, maybe suggested use the PowerPoint in Japanese but speak in English, or vice versa. I gave them several options of what I thought might be possible. In the end, unless you have a base and you have enough English on your foundation, as well as you can understand enough, the students will not be able to comprehend. And the professor, if they have never really spoken English, but they've studied it for 8, 10, 12 years, doesn't mean that they can teach in English. That was the major lose-lose situation. So yes, Ms. Nishi, if classes could be taught in English and the professor or teacher in this case could speak English well enough and the students had a foundation enough and they could hear and understand enough, that would be brilliant. That's what you want. And that's why even at the universities, another Ministry of Education program was, they gave lots of money to these bigger universities and they said, we're going to create all English programs. We're going to compete against all the other, like Korea has their own, and a lot of these non-English speaking countries are starting to come up. China has their own, where they they teach the whole course in English, right? Figure, okay, great. Well, it was an interesting idea. However, what do you think the problem with that is? The problem is, first, you have almost all Japanese. What they were also hoping is that as they have exchange students and study abroad students, that they would be in the class with the Japanese, and that would help internationalize the class. Yes, there were some that did come in. Yes, there were some that did attend, but there are very few, too few, because you have such a large population of Japanese. What happens? The Japanese students, of course, outside of the class, as soon as the class ends, it's all in Japanese. And in the class, unless they're talking to a foreigner, they're going to be speaking Japanese. And the professor, even if they're speaking English, that's the only English they're getting, a subject being taught in English. Now, the problem there also was that many of these Japanese professors weren't that adept at teaching in English, especially speaking English. But they tried. Some of them are really good. That was fine. And then you had foreign teachers who were teaching in English. So they were getting some, but only that 90 minutes one way, and maybe taking notes, but not actual producing. Maybe on the test they might write something. I don't know if the professors. Oh, that was the other problem. The Japanese professors and the foreign professors. And this is from my friend who went to KKO in Tokyo, and she was in this 4-year type of program. She said that the professors in that all English 4-year program still taught the same way that they taught in Japanese, and still just gave like one test. Like when you go to the United States, usually it's very rigorous, right? You got small tests, you got papers, you got reports, you got a midterm, and you got a final, you got constant stuff. It's constant and it's very rigorous. So I think the Ministry of Education didn't even realize that was a major part of the whole rigor of creating this kind of environment, like a Western style teaching environment. But they left it to the professors, who then taught it Japanese style in English. So it really had really little value. It still goes on to this day. I'm not a fan of it. Hopefully they get more international students that actually come in that would actually diverse the class and maybe get people more to interact and speak English. But on the overall, I would say not the best idea. So again, the ministry has tried in different ways, but they have failed at most levels, because it's kind of like a band-aid approach. They hit this, they give money here, they hit this, then it's next this, then it's next this. And these programs are supposed to become self-funding after they leave, after they get the money for 5 years. What happens is these programs just disappear after 5 years. Or one maybe gets absorbed by the university. But a lot of times, teachers or professors who are hired for these programs are on a 5-year contract, because they know that after 5 years, the money ends, it's gone. So basically, same thing, just going through the motion, almost kind of like just band-aiding it, but no one is looking at the entire picture and said, how do we get all of this to work together? How do we make a seamless scaffolding experience? How do we get the JET program from the Ministry of Foreign, and how do we train those AETs? And how do we train the Japanese teachers to work with the AETs? And all this, it needs to be a master plan. But I don't know if there's anybody who can do that. Now, there is one politician, Taro Kono-san. He ran for prime minister against Kishida, but he lost. He went to Georgetown for 4 years. So I think if anybody has the potential to maybe make more changes, hopefully bigger changes, it's him. But nobody else has really studied abroad, so I don't think they can get the idea of what this whole language thing is supposed to be like. Let's see. J-Star says, do you think the absence of Christianity religion in Japan impacts the prevalence of English in Japan? For instance, fewer missionaries from speaking. Yes, 100%. I think when the Tokugawa era started and they kicked out or killed all the Christians or the foreign priests, that was huge. And that also, I didn't even think about that. Good point, J-Star, is that could be the reason also why Korea is so strong as far as their interest in English more than Japanese, was because the Christianity impact also. And the Koreans have this idea of, philanthropy and all that. Japanese, very few have that. I think that's a Christian base. It's a core. And so that's what you can see. Yes, Christianity definitely had influence in Korea versus Japan after they were kicked out. They went into sakoku, right? Period of isolation for 250 something years. In that way, Japan stayed pure to themselves, and that's why no one was conquering them or anything. That's why the kabuki and all the arts flourished during that time. There weren't wars and things. But as far as like the international influence or the idea of English, that all got stopped. So yes, thank you, J-Star Dream. That was actually a really good point. Like, what percentage of Japanese are Christian? I think it's less than 1%. And I think Koreans is quite high. And that's the big difference. on a lot of the value systems like philanthropy, but also I think with English, it's definitely connected to that. And Philippines was also under the US for a while too, and the Filipino language is a lot like Spanish, kind of combined, closer to English and things. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of the Christian culture, and I think somehow it's also connected to English in a lot of ways too. All of that, I think, yeah, makes a big difference. And why Japan, who had been isolated for 250 something years, and then only after World War II was occupied by the United States, that's all in their whole entire 3,000 year history or more. And that's why change is so hard, because in Japan, tradition is what people like and are used to. A lot of people, that's the go-to, the default. We can say, oh, we're traditional. And that almost equals you don't have to change, or you don't want to change, basically. So that's where it gets really hard. A lot of people know that they have to change, but a lot of people don't want to change. And that's why you have this gap going on. And in a society where older is usually used to be at least better, or, all the leaders, if you see the politicians, or whether it's company presidents, they're all old. So, like the idea is that if that's the people who are leading Japan, then thinking is still going to be very, I don't want to say old-fashioned, but more traditional, more conservative is the word I think I need. And that jump from conservative to being more, not aggressive, but more assertive and more, out there, I think is what Japan is dealing with right now. I don't know what Japan is going to do. The English system is not working. And as Einstein said, and someone corrected me last week, thank you, I forgot who it was. Einstein didn't officially say this, but the quote is that doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is a sign of insanity. And I believe this is what it is for the Japanese English education system. You can't just do the same thing or do little band-aid things or do these 5-year projects and expect that things are going to be changing. But I think the people who are in charge, the bureaucrats, the leaders, they don't have the vision either. They don't know what to do. For example, you take a country like Finland, right? Who at one point back, I don't know how many years, their education system was not that good and they wanted to be the best in the world. So they sent out all the experts through the world, their people, and learned and came back, and then they built their education system where today it's one of the best education systems in the world, right? Finland. So Japan could do something like that. Of course, Finland is only 5 million people compared to 127 million people. For example, to be an English teacher in Finland, you need a master's degree in English. Even if you teach in a kindergarten, they get it. Okay, if you're going to teach English, you better know the subject. It's not doing like a 3-week practicum of teaching and then you pass the English exam of that school that now allows you to teach English. You got to have a master's in English. So I really think wow, there is a different way to do this. It's going to cost money, and you're going to have to retrain your teachers, right? And you got thousands and thousands of English teachers out there who don't speak English that well, right? You can't fire all the English teachers. They won't have jobs, and that wouldn't be right. So Japan is kind of like almost in too deep, but they don't know really what to do. And the ministry people, they come up with these new policies, which how many of them just die along the way because of I think I said before, remember Tokyo University? They were doing something really small, not small, but for them it was big. But for me, it was like, oh, how difficult is this? Changing the start of the year from April to September. And that would mean that the recruitment of the companies, everybody would have to change to maybe September or figure out how to do it all year round. And the University of Tokyo president came out and said, we're going to do this. And if Tokyo University says do it, everyone goes, whoa, Tokyo University, like, whoa. So he said it. And then it was like, he got so much flack from the faculty and the people around him that 3 months later, he had to come out and kind of quietly just say, oh, sorry, change my mind. I'm not going to do that anymore because of the pressures. As I said last live, the Japanese proverb of the standing nail gets pounded down lives until this day very, very, very strongly. Even though it's not like it was back 20 years, which is even worse, it's there and it's more unseen, but it's there. So you try to come up, I get pounded on a lot, but again, I'm a foreigner. I'm American, right? Japanese American. So in a way, there's kind of a gray area that they might pound on me, but yeah, I'm a foreigner. But if you're Japanese and you try to come up with something that there's a lot of flack, you're going to take a lot of hitting. Boom, 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 boom. So a lot of people don't want to get that, or they want to get along, because the idea of Japan, getting along is really, really important, right? And it's a great concept. But then how do you make change if you always gotta agree? I don't know the answer, but I'm just throwing out some thoughts here. Ralph Suniko says, computer games that stimulates life in Japan will help people who want to go to Japan, especially those who could not afford it. They will also help Japan with its over. Yes. Okay, Ralph, you're on that. Figure out how to do that business or whatever that situation. Create games for people who want to go to Japan. I think that's a great idea. If people can't go, or even before they go, they could see where they're going, and maybe do something on other areas, not the crowded areas. So we can spread out the tourism. Did you know that the National Tourism Director, JNTO, I think, he said that in 2030 they want to have 60 million tourists. He said that Japan has the capacity. So right now they got 17 in this year alone, right? And people are saying, over tourism is too much. Can you imagine if they double? Look at, so let's say by the end of the year they get close to 30 million, maybe 28, or they double that by 2030. Imagine what Japan is going to be like. But again, they believe that there's a lot of these unknown areas, uncharted areas that people don't know, and you have to spread the people out. And that's great. I think that's what you have to do, right? As I said before in my past lives, my problem has been working with rural Japan, like I'm going to do a Shimanami bike tour again in September, just trying to get an e-bike rented. Anything you do that's not part of the precedent becomes a whole fiasco. Or getting the hotel reservation. I'm using the fax machine. I have to ask my Japanese friend to call because I'm worried that my Japanese might not be good enough. I make one mistake and I got 7 senior people with me. It's going to be a big problem. So me, who lived in Japan 30 years, has to ask a Japanese person to call to make sure there is no mistake, because they don't have online. They only have fax machine, but the fax has to be in written Japanese. There's like all this stuff. So if you're talking about 60 million people in 2030, you better upgrade all your systems in the country areas and everywhere in Japan. And I don't think that's going to happen that easily. But again, that's my theory. But yeah, Ralph, maybe yours is the answer to that. In the US, those rules are state by state, even different by district. Ours requires a master's degree. We agree a school year change would help. You and the Todai professor, Tanabe Tours, and you folks require a master's degree at the district. That's great. Oh, so this is from Oregon, I believe. Oregon is way ahead in that way. That's great. Yeah, maybe the way to do it would be give it to the prefectures maybe, but I think already the way Japan is designed, they're so dependent on what the national government does because of this whole kind of hierarchy, patriarchy style, like the samurai system I call it, that prefectures cannot or don't want or just not used to being in charge, right? Tokyo's all powerful, right? But you take someplace like Shimane, or you take someplace like Okinawa, or you take someplace like Gunma, and maybe they don't have the financial resources or the people, the staffing. I don't know. So I just want to end that I don't know what Japan is going to do. The English system problem is here, and I don't think the government knows what to do either. So of course, if they don't know, then I wouldn't have no idea. Another thing that I didn't talk about is like just the spelling. Like on my thumbnail, I was showing how a lot of times you'll see misspelled words around or signs. And you know what? I'm always amazed that doesn't bother the Japanese. I think it's even like they have big sweatshirts that have big English words that are either misspelled or the grammar is wrong, and it's just because it looks nice, right? But like even like forms at the hospital or signs or anything, anywhere, many times they are misspelled, the grammar is wrong, or there's a wrong word choice. But nobody seems to care. And yet, if you work at a Japanese company especially, or university, if it's a Japanese kanji and you made one little mistake, wow, heads roll, man. I mean, like people get really upset. So the Japanese are super particular about Japanese being perfect. But when it comes to English, maybe because it's still foreign, or maybe because it doesn't matter for their actual work, that nobody seems to worry about it. I have offered at my company many times to correct different hospitals I've gone to. I've volunteered. I go to hotels, and when I stay, if I see their English form, I go with a red pen and I correct it, and I say to them, you might want to change this. It's up to them if they want to change it. I don't want to be like bossy, but I always try to help them, because I said, if you fix it once, you don't have to worry about it anymore, right? Just fix it. Fix your website. Just get it done. I think the big mistakes that really bother me are like spelling mistakes. How can you have spelling mistakes on your website when you have spell check nowadays and they don't have anyone to look it over? I believe all companies in Japan need to have a final native English check. Even if you got the Tokyo University guy doing the final check, you need to have a native English speaker because of what's natural and what seems to flow. Sometimes it's just a nuanced thing, but if you want to sell it well, if you want a good advertisement, you want a good flyer, you want a good poster, ask intelligent, experienced native English speaker to help you out. Just hire them part-time and just get them to look at your signs or whatever, because once you get it done, it's done, right? But if there's a mistake, it makes you look unprofessional, and then a lot of the tourists go, oh yeah, that's Japan. It makes Japan's image still low. It doesn't help them. You want to show them, like I go to Bangkok before, and you go there and maybe one or two mistakes, but otherwise their English is impeccable. Like the advertisement and all that. I'm sure they get professionals to do it. That's where you want to be, Japan. And another problem is in Japan, a lot of companies, they have like international, like non-English speaking like workers, whether they're from Taiwan or China or Vietnam, and they ask them to check the English because they can do some English. That cannot be the final check. I've seen so many that I have to go and check after, and it's not their fault. It's the management or the boss's fault for not realizing that, yeah, they can check it, but you still need the final native English check so you can get it correct. If not, you're gonna have like little mistakes that make that company look embarrassing, I think. Yeah, if you can have a coverage like that, if one can read it and one can, if you're doing like a really important translation, if you have two native speakers from each language working together, that is ideal. That would cost a little bit more money, but again, not that much. Just hire part-time, right? You don't have to hire them full-time. Just hire part-time when you need it, especially if you're you have things in English. Now, those who use Google Translation, like it's automatically, that's okay. It's just that it's not going to be as natural and impactful as if you wrote your own, but maybe that's better than having someone in the staff who is not a native English speaker do it and putting that up. And if there's mistakes there, it's your staff, right? If it's Google Translate, you can say, oh, it's Google Translation. I don't know. That's not a good answer either. Thank you for joining me today. I know for some people, my sister said this topic is not interesting, but I thought for people who have lived in Japan a bit or have wondered about the English or have wondered why Japanese don't speak English so well, although they study it so long, I thought it'd be a good subject. Think about it. They all study. If they graduate from high school, which most people do, that's a minimum 6 years. If they go to the university, they usually get another 2 years, 1 to 2 years. So they got 8 years when they graduate from college, and then they still cannot speak English. Of course, when they meet someone, there's a complex, right? Oh, I studied 8 years and I can't speak English. So I think that also works against the Japanese, that they feel this complex, which is not fair to them. They put it in the time, they put it in the work on the grammar and the reading, that they're not able to converse. 4 skills. They got to work on the 4 skills. I think also maybe part of it is cultural, because when I was interviewing Emily on my podcast video, and she said that in Japan, the classes are all just one way and just quiet. So people, if that's kind of the mood, it's not encouraging to have people speak out, right? Because that's the way it's been always done. So the idea is you need to train the teachers on how to motivate and encourage the students to speak out in class, to apply what you have taught them grammar-wise, and to try and speak to them in English as much as possible. I know you have a lot of really good teachers who can do this, but there's a lot of teachers who are afraid or just not willing or not able to. And that's where the Ministry of Education should be putting their money. Not on these not silly, but projects that for 5 years and just circulate money around among the big schools. Invest it in your teachers and this education system, and do a scaffolding system that's seamless all the way to the university, and figure out an English test. Maybe just make one, combine all the best of the 7 tests, make one test that all universities use, or something like that, or leave it to the universities, but then that's still going to be a little crazy. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, y'all. Mata until 2 weeks. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Have a great week.